Welcome to NP Certification Q&A, presented by Fitzgerald Health Education Associates. This podcast is for NP students studying to pass their NP certification exam. Getting to the correct test answers means breaking down the exam questions themselves. Expert Fitzgerald faculty clinicians share their knowledge and experience to help you dissect the anatomy of a test question so you can better understand how to arrive at the correct test answer. So, if you're ready, let's jump right in.
A 22-year-old male patient is started on sertraline 50 milligrams PO daily after presenting with a major depressive episode. After tolerating it without difficulty for 2 weeks, his dose was increased to 100 milligrams PO daily. Approximately 4 weeks later, he reported an unusual set of new symptoms for the last week and a half. He says he feels amped up and just very generally agitated and nervous. He was short-tempered at work and home and was snapping at people for no good reason. He also reports difficulty concentrating at work. Last week, he expressed disproportionate anger at his work, and his boss told him that he was bipolar and he should be put on medication. The psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner discusses with the patient that: do you discuss with the patient that A, when his symptoms are preceded by antidepressant therapy, a diagnosis of bipolar does not apply? Or do you discuss with the patient B, his symptoms may be consistent with bipolar disorder if they persist for at least 2 weeks? Or do you discuss C, a formal assessment of the social and occupational implications of his symptoms should be performed? Or finally, do you discuss D, the symptoms are most likely a physiologic adaptation to the sertraline and most often normalize? And so, the best answer to this question is A. When symptoms are preceded by antidepressant therapy, a diagnosis of bipolar does not apply. Remember, mania is a symptom. Mania is a single symptom. Mania may or may not mean that the patient has bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder has a series of diagnostic criteria that must be met before we assign that diagnosis to a patient. And consistent with DSM-5-TR criteria, a manic episode that emerges in response to an antidepressant does not constitute a bipolar disorder if these symptoms occur beyond the natural washout period of the sertraline. Then bipolar may be appropriate. In other words, having a manic episode after starting an antidepressant doesn't constitute bipolar. We only even consider that diagnosis if the symptoms persist beyond the natural washout period. So then, of course, the next logical question is, what is the natural washout period of sertraline? Well, a little bit, it depends on whose book you read. Remember that sertraline has a half-life of somewhere around 30 hours. Give or take a few hours in either direction. Sertraline has a half-life of somewhere around 30 hours. But that's only half-life. The projection is about 6 days for sertraline to be completely eliminated from plasma. And then we have to consider that sertraline does have an active metabolite. So some authors advocate the washout period for sertraline of 6 days, and others advocate that a washout period of 13 days is more appropriate. In any event, we can't even consider this a manic episode unless the symptoms persist beyond the washout period. The exact washout period is really not relevant here. We don't need to know to answer this question. What we do need to know is that we can't call it bipolar unless the symptoms extend beyond the washout period of sertraline. Choice B says his symptoms may be consistent with bipolar disorder if they persist for at least 2 weeks. We can say that because we have no idea if or when he stopped taking the sertraline. I mean, as a general rule of thumb, we can consider any manic episode consistent with bipolar disorder if the patient has had those symptoms for a week. That's irrespective of using an antidepressant. So B would not apply. And C, a formal assessment of the social and occupational implications should be performed. I mean, they always should be performed when you are considering a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, but given what his boss has said about him being bipolar, we can reasonably assume that there is an occupational implication here. And D is not correct. I mean, the symptoms, the sertraline does have a period of physiologic adaptation, just like any pharmacologic agent does. But what's happening here, or what's reported here, this feeling amped up, generally agitated and nervous, short-tempered, being snappy, being disproportionately angry, this is not characteristic of a physiologic adaptation. So again, the best answer to this question, given this scenario, we discuss with the patient that we don't even consider a diagnosis of bipolar disorder unless the mania has persisted beyond that natural washout period of sertraline.
Thank you for listening to NP Certification Q&A, presented by Fitzgerald Health Education Associates. Please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. And for more NP resources, visit FHEA.com.